So we make a jump from ancient times to more modern times in terms of gurus. So Pattabhi Jois's teacher was the great Tirumalai Krishnamacharya. His teacher was the great yogi that lived in the cave in Tibet, Sri Rama Mohan Brahmachari. So just a little about how this lineage came about. So Krishnamacharya was introduced to yoga by his father at about the age of 5. And it was something he was always fascinated with. But he was also a very brilliant student. So eventually he went off to Varanasi to study Sanskrit because that's where the best scholars were. And he didn't stop at Sanskrit. He earned an equivalent of like 7 PhDs in various subjects, medicine and music and logic and Vedanta and many things. So a brilliant guy, but you know, his first love was yoga. So while he was a student, he'd heard stories of this legendary yogi that lived in a cave up in the Himalayas. And so he undertook this 200-mile trek by foot looking for this guy in the cave. And eventually, miraculously, he found him. This was Sri Rama Mohan Brahmachari. And so, you know, rather than, you know, greeting him cordially and inviting him in, sort of to test his resolve, and he like made him stand outside in the snow for 3 days just to see if he was serious. But you know, eventually he invited him in and asked him, you know, who he was, why he'd come, and Krishnamacharya said, "Well, I heard you're a great yogi. I'm coming in hopes that you will teach me." So Sri Rama Mohan Brahmachari consented to teaching Krishnamacharya, and Krishnamacharya stayed in the cave for 7 years, learning from his guru, and his guru apparently knew like 7,000 asanas. Of the 7,000, he taught Krishnamacharya like 3,000, and I guess he figured that was enough. But he taught him many other things as well about yoga therapy, healing. Anyway, at the end of 7 years, he said, "Okay, time to go." And Krishnamacharya was very grateful to his guru for all the instruction he had received. And so, as was traditional, he said to him, "Before I leave, I'd like to give you your guru dakshina." Guru dakshina is the traditional payment to the guru for services rendered. So Sri Rama Mohan Brahmachari, living in a cave, you know, didn't have a lot of material needs. Money didn't really mean anything to him. And so what he said to Krishnamacharya was, "As your guru dakshina, what I want you to do is get married, raise a family, and teach yoga." Now this wasn't exactly what he wanted to hear at this point, because well, teaching yoga, for one thing, was about the lowliest profession that a highly educated Brahmin could have at that time in history, which was, you know, early in the 20th century. You know, yoga was not very popular in India at the time, and it was also considered to be like the province of sadhus, you know, renunciates, swamis, monks. And the prevailing notion was that once you started practicing yoga, you would lose interest in the world, and then you'd be done. So it wasn't considered to be appropriate for householders to practice. But Sri Rama Mohan Brahmachari, in his great prescience, saw that in the 20th century, yoga was to undergo a transformation, and that householders, in India, what are called grahastas, were going to start practicing yoga. So he wanted Krishnamacharya to get married and have a family so he would know exactly what life was like as a grihasta, as a family man. So he hooked up with an 11-year-old girl, as was the custom in India at the time. He's probably in his mid-30s. And in the book Health, Healing, and Beyond, there's a wedding photo that shows a very stern Krishnamacharya and a terrified-looking 11-year-old girl standing next to him. But anyway, they got married and had a bunch of kids, and he began teaching yoga. And they were very poor until some years later he had the good fortune to meet the Maharaja of Mysore, who was suffering from some malady, I think maybe diabetes at the time. And he'd heard that Krishnamacharya was a great healer. So he asked if Krishnamacharya could help him, and Krishnamacharya ended up healing him of diabetes. And so the Maharaja became his patron and set him up in a nice yogashala in Jagan Mohan Palace in Mysore. And things took a turn for the better. So around this time, Krishnamacharya liked to travel around a bit, so he traveled about 100 miles north of Mysore to the town of Hassan and stayed there for a while and taught. And it was there in 1927 that Pattabhi Jois first met Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya was doing a lecture and a yoga demonstration, and Guruji came and witnessed the yoga demonstration and didn't understand the talk, but something about the yoga really captured his attention. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says something to the effect that the people that are really attracted to yoga in this lifetime are the people that did it in a previous lifetime. So that was sort of the feeling that Pattabhi Jois had when he saw Krishnamacharya doing yoga. It was something very familiar, and it struck a chord of recognition within him. So after the demonstration, 12-year-old Pattabhi Jois approached the formidable and very stern Krishnamacharya and asked if it was possible to study yoga with him. And he said, well, first he grilled him, who's your father? What does he do? And all this stuff, just to make sure he was from a good family and he was the right caste and all that stuff. But he did eventually accept him as a student, and he stayed in Hassan for a couple of years. And so Pattabhi Jois would walk the 5 miles to Hassan every morning to practice with Krishnamacharya, and then he would go to school afterwards. So yoga practice was like 7:30 and school started at 10:30, so it all worked out. But he didn't tell his family that he was practicing yoga because he didn't think they would approve. They weren't really yogis. They were priests, they were astrologers, they were farmers. They weren't really yogis. So anyway, Krishnamacharya left Hassan after a couple of years, went back to Mysore. And in another year or so, Pattabhi Jois decided, I've had it, with these farmers and astrologers. So with 3 rupees in his pocket, he hopped a train and went to Mysore. And in Mysore, he hooked up again with Krishnamacharya and had to beg for food because he had no money, and stayed with some friends at the Sanskrit college. Eventually, on the basis of his yoga ability, was able to get a scholarship to go to the Sanskrit college, and later on was offered a teaching position there by the Maharaja himself. In about 1937, at the age of 22, he started teaching there at the Sanskrit college. And he continued to study with Krishnamacharya for the next 25 years. Guruji is fond of telling the story that in the beginning, at the Jagan Mohan Palace in Mysore, Krishnamacharya had 100 students 25 years later, he had 3. So Krishnamacharya was not known for being, you know, a warm and fuzzy kind of a guy. You know, he was very exacting, very stern, very harsh. And Guruji would always say, "Oh, very strict man." So anyway, went from 100 to 3. And then when the Maharaj died, Krishnamacharya lost his patron and moved to Chennai, what was formerly Madras. And Pattabhi Jois continued to teach at the Sanskrit University for 37 years until he retired in 1973. In the beginning, he was making 10 rupees a month. So it wasn't a highly paid position, but there were some perks. He got to study at the same time and eventually won a degree called a Vidwan, which is sort of equivalent to a master's degree, something like that. So not as highly educated as Krishnamacharya, but he had a more winning personality. So he was able not to drive away all of his students, which was a good thing. So he retired from teaching at the Sanskrit College in 1973 and went into private practice, teaching out of his home in Lakshmipuram in Mysore. And it was around that time that the first American showed up, this guy Norman Allen, who had met Guruji's son Manju in Pondicherry. Manju was giving a yoga demonstration. So Norman was very impressed with what Manju could do yoga-wise. So he said, "Where did you learn this? Who taught you?" He said, "Oh, my father." "Your father, where is he?" He said, "Oh, he's in Mysore." "Will he teach me?" "No." But Norman was undeterred, and he went to Mysore anyway, and found Pattabhi Jois and went to his door and explained that he'd met Manju and was hoping he could study yoga there. And Guruji said, "No, this is not possible." At the time he wasn't teaching Westerners. But Norman wouldn't go away. He just kept hanging around. He would come and watch the Indian students practice. And, you know, after a couple of weeks, he was ballsy enough to come into the room and start practicing himself. Guruji ultimately admired his persistence and started teaching him. Then the next American that showed up was David Williams. And David stayed for several months, and then when he came back to the States, he settled in Encinitas and began teaching Ashtanga Yoga here in 1974. So Encinitas is actually the American birthplace of Ashtanga Yoga. We have the longest standing Ashtanga community anywhere in the West. So we have that distinction. David had enough students, 10 or 15 students, that in another year they raised enough money to bring Pattabhi Jois and his son Manju here for the first time in 1975. Guruji taught here in Encinitas, maybe 15 students. And Manju never left, still here. It's my neighbor. His wife teaches kindergarten at Capri School around the corner from my house. So he liked Manju liked Encinitas. You know, Guruji liked Encinitas too, but he had to go back to India because his wife was there. That's not that. Anyway, Guruji has subsequently returned to Encinitas many times. The next time he came was 78, which is where I entered the picture. That's when I met Guruji in 1978. And he was teaching at the old church in Encinitas, Levada and Marchetta streets. You want to make the pilgrimage to the old church, go to Juanita's taco shop, take a left, go west for 2 blocks, and you'll find the old church. So in 78, I met Guruji then, and there were maybe 30 students at that time. David Williams had moved to Maui and had begun teaching people in Maui. So there was the Encinitas crew, which Manju had inherited from David when David left, and plus the Maui crew. So maybe 30 students, and it was all Mysore style back then. And in the evening, Guruji was teaching a theory class, which was kind of interesting because he didn't speak English. And Manju was his translator. So, Guruji would quote liberally from the scriptures and go on, and was quite animated, would laugh and cry, and then turn to Manju for the translation, and we'd get like 10 words. Losing a little bit in the translation. And then he was trying to teach us a chant from Shankaracharya called the Guru Ashtakam. I'm sorry I don't remember it. But basically what the chant says is that, you may be handsome and intelligent and have a beautiful wife and gifted children and own vast estates and be well thought of in the community and all of this, but without the grace of the Guru, what use is any of it? So the refrain is Tatikim, 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 Tatikim. What use, what use, what use? So Guruji was trying to impart upon us the importance of having a Guru, and what a great blessing that is. So I don't know if we got it. I guess we didn't get it the first time because he had to keep coming back. So, Guruji returned many times to Encinitas. 1980, 82, 85, 87, 89, 93, 2000, 2001, 2005. I don't know how many trips that makes, but he came more often to Encinitas than any other place. So he's certainly a part of the history of Encinitas. And in the beginning, it was a very small scene, and it didn't really begin to grow until maybe about the mid-90s. So he took a long break between 93 and 2000. He didn't travel to the States. His wife, Maha, passed away during that time, and he was really devastated by her death because they'd been together for 60 years, and she was like his rock. So between that time, between 93 and 2000, we went from being able to hold Guruji's classes in a space this size in 93 to in the year 2000 having to rent a huge gymnasium. So during that time, there was like exponential growth in the community. So we went from whatever 40 people to 300 people during that time. And it was always Guruji's dream that yoga would spread throughout the world, and he saw it happen in his lifetime. And he sort of languished in obscurity until he was about 80 years old. Didn't really make much money or have much notoriety, but then he made up for lost time. Like in the last 13 years of his life, he became quite well known and quite wealthy by Indian standards. So you saw him in his later years, when he was decked out in gold chains, Rolex watch, and diamond ring, and all that. So these were all gifts from students. And there was a famous picture of Patabi Joyce and B.K.S. Iyengar on the cover of Namarupa magazine some years ago. B.K.S. Iyengar came to pay his respects just after Guruji's 90th birthday, and it looks like they're trying to out-bling each other. all the gold. And, so I could say a lot about Guruji, but I might get emotional if I try to do that. So I'll just say that I don't think I ever met anyone who loved teaching as much as he did. You know, he was very passionate about teaching, and it really sustained him and kept him going. So eventually, when he got into his 90s and his health began to decline a little bit, and he wasn't able to teach every day, that was sort of his disconnect from his lifeline, and so his demise was fairly rapid after he wasn't able to teach anymore. But, I remember one time going to Mysore, maybe about 10 years ago, and I was only going to be there for a couple of weeks, and it was in December, and Guruji's wife passed away in December. So every December, he does special pujas, special ceremonies to honor the anniversary of his wife's death. And always the Yogashala is closed for a while during that time. So I arrive in December with some of my close friends who are also old students of Guruji's. And we go to see Guruji, and Guruji says, "Oh, Yogashala is closed, 2 weeks." I said, "Really? We're only here for 2 weeks." So anyway, we come back the next day to visit, and Guruji has thought about it, and he says, "Yogashala is closing 1 week." And then he thought about it some more, and we came back the next day, and he said, "Yogashala is closing 3 days." So he couldn't bear the thought of having us all there, not being able to torture us. So. He loved teaching that much. And, I mean, there was one incident that happened. The Yogashala was closed, probably for the same reason. He hadn't been teaching for a while, but he was just itching to teach. And he was standing outside of his house one day, and a couple of yoga students walked by, and he grabbed them off the streets and dragged them into the Yogashala and started teaching just because he couldn't stand it. As it turned out, they'd already practiced that day. Didn't want to say anything. So, anyway, one thing that a guru tries to do is to transmit some of his essence to his students. And I had the good fortune to be his student for 30 years, and I got a little of that essence, you know, not just the nuts and bolts of the practice, but also hopefully some of the spirit of the practice as well, which is at least as important as the, you know, the nuts and bolts. So, you know, we try to keep his spirit alive and well around here. And, some people say that they've had visitations from him, looking at a picture, suddenly for him to emerge from the picture and come and start chatting with them and stuff like that. So if that happens, you're not necessarily having a psychotic break. But then again, maybe you are. Anyway, we used to wonder and marvel at Guruji's energy. You know, even well into his 80s, you know, he had a very challenging schedule. And, you know, during the latter days at Lakshmipuram, which is a very small yoga space, at the end they were trying to squeeze 12 people into that space. You know, sometimes he would have like 120 students there. So if you can only fit 12 people into the space, what does that mean in terms of how long he was working in the morning? You know, there wasn't upstairs space for people to do finishing poses, but you know, so he was doing like my sort of class for 10 hours in his 80s. You can only imagine, you know, at the confluence back in May, we had to teach for 3 hours, and it was killing me. Teach a Mysore class for 3 hours. That's a win. I remember the last time Guruji came to Encinitas was 2005. He was just a couple of months shy of his 90th birthday. And we were doing the practice in the gym at the Boys and Girls Club in Encinitas. Big space. So I said to Guruji, the space is so big, do you need a microphone? He just laughed. Not needing. My voice is strong. Shut up, boy's voice. Me, strong voice. He didn't need a microphone. So, I remember asking once, Guruji, how do you keep going? Like you're going, he said, very strong mind. Every day, reading the Gita, chanting, mind is very strong. So that was his favorite spiritual text, was the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. And he wouldn't just read it, he would chant the verses from it. He had an amazing memory and could chant, these texts verbatim by memory, the Upanishads and the Gita, sutras and whatever. Something that seems to be declining in modern age is our power of memory. What's the key to memorizing things? Really, it's just repetition. It's the key. So this is always segue into a song. So the song, it's a song to Krishna. What does the K stand for in K Patavi Joyce? Krishna. Krishna was also Guruji's father's name was Krishna. And the Bhagavad Gita, in case you haven't read it, is considered to be the greatest of all dialogues between teacher and student. Krishna as the Guru, Arjuna as his disciple, and this dialogue takes place on the eve of the great battle between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Krishna and Arjuna are looking out at the opposing army, and Arjuna in the opposing army sees his grandfather, he sees his Guru, he sees his cousins, and all of a sudden he's overcome with despair, and he lays down his weapons and says to Krishna, "Oh Krishna, I can't do it. I can't fight." So at that point, does Krishna pat him on the back and say, "That's okay, Arjuna. Fighting is no good"? No, that's not what he says. What does he say? Basically, he says, this is your dharma, Arjuna. This is your big moment. This is what your whole life is about. This moment. Take up your arms and fight. If you lay down your arms at this critical moment, you'll be a laughing stock. Your name will live forever in infamy. Oh, anyway, the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita is a rousing pep talk given to Arjuna by Krishna, reminding him of what his dharma is, and also explaining to him the science of yoga along the way. But before this critical moment in history, and Krishna is considered to be what's called an avatara, an incarnation of Vishnu. In India, there are 10 recognized avatars, or incarnations of Vishnu, and Vishnu incarnates in human form when Dharma declines sufficiently on earth that he needs to intervene. So Dharma basically means, living the right way. So at this critical juncture in history, the Kshatriyas, who are the kings and the warriors, had become very corrupt, had become very arrogant and very powerful, and were not upholding the Dharma. So Krishna's purpose for his incarnation basically was to wipe out the Kshatriya race. And how was that to happen? Through the vehicle of this great war between the cousins and their dispute over who was the rightful king. So Krishna all along was engineering this event, the great war, to happen. But before he had to get down to this serious business, he had some good times when he was growing up. There was a prophecy concerning Krishna's birth. One of the evil Kshatriyas, or kings and warriors, was his own uncle, Kamsa. Kamsa had been behaving very badly. And so the prophecy was that Krishna would be born to kill him. He would be born to Devaki and Vasudeva, were his birth parents' names, and he was to be like the seventh child. So Kamsa heard about this prophecy, and he had Devaki and Vasudeva imprisoned, and every time they had a child, he had the child murdered. So when Krishna was born under miraculous and mysterious circumstances, he was able to be secretly spirited away from the kingdom and grew up in seclusion in the forest in a place called Vrindavan. And he grew up as a cowherd. He was born into nobility, as a prince by birth, but instead he was raised as a cowherd with foster parents. His foster father's name was Nanda, and his mother was Yashoda. So in the song we're going to sing, you hear words like Gopala, Govinda. So Gopala is one of the pet names of Krishna. Literally it means a cowboy. A go is a cow. A pal is a boy. Govinda means the one who is pleasing to the cows. Gopala, Gopala, Devaki Nandana Gopala. Devaki, again, is the name of his mother, his real mother, his birth mother. Nanda is the name of his foster father. Why his birth mother his foster father? It was just the right number of syllables, the right rhythm. Devaki Vasudeva didn't work, so Devaki Nanda was used instead. Devaki Nanda Megopala. So this one, again, begins slowly. We'll do a little invocation. Shri Krishna Govinda. Hare Murare He Nata Raya Vasudeva.